Good morning, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Abby and I'm doing a very different video. I'm doing a video today that's not my normal content just because I'm being asked lots of questions about it and I feel like it could help other people. My son, Magnus, is 2 years, 3 months old now, and he has just been officially diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea. A little disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. I just advocate for knowing something's wrong with him, and we had a little bit of a struggle with getting this diagnosis. But I'll take you back to the very beginning, and hopefully this will help you have some either understanding of what our experience was, maybe just some confidence to go back to the doctor and say, actually, no, I appreciate what you're saying, but things aren't improving and I think my daughter or son might have X, Y, and Z. But hopefully this video helps in some way. I really hope it does. From a baby, from a newborn, my son would never lay on his back. You'd put him down on his back and he would know. He would just know. He'd wake up. He would just startle awake. He would know. And at the time, people were like, oh, they're just not used to a hard surface. So believe me when I say we tried everything. We tried the wedgie hog, which is like a foam wedge you put in your cot so they're reclined. We tried reflux stuff, Infocol. We tried everything, absolutely everything. He would not sleep on his back. We were swaddling him. We were putting a pacifier in his mouth, or a dummy in England. Nothing worked. He just knew when he was on his back. And in hindsight, the reason he knew he was on his back is because when he would lay down, his obstructive sleep apnea, or his tonsils that were very enlarged, would block his airways and he would wake up startled because his airways were blocked. And when I look back on videos, there's a very, very clear indications of this. Like he'll be sleeping soundly and then suddenly he's like he's gasping for air. So we had so many problems with him. He had to sleep on our chest for, I'd say, the first 10 to 12 months of his life. Like, it'd have to be sleeping on our chest. Even when we were sleeping at night time, he had to sleep like reclined on us. It was difficult to navigate round. Then he eventually started sleeping on his side, but he'd wake up in a panic because his airways would be blocked, and he would find me, and then we would have wake ups. Like when he was, I don't know, maybe a year old, he would wake up every hour. Like it would be all the time. He'd go back to sleep really quickly. Like he wasn't up and, you know, like it's not like he didn't want to sleep. He wanted to sleep. So he did find sleeping very challenging himself. But we struggled a lot. We had all of these symptoms. I went to the doctors and I said, something's not right with him. I think it could be this. And the doctor, and I really rate our doctor's surgery. I think they're wonderful. Our doctor was like, no, it's just behavioural things. It's because you're breastfeeding. And I was like, I don't know about that. But he did always seek comfort in wanting to be latched on. So a lot of the time he would be latched on. And I think it's because when he was latched on, his mouth was open. So his airways were just freer for him to breathe. So that's just how we had to get through like the early year. But yeah, so I took him to the doctors a couple of times and they said, no, it's behavioural issues. There was lots of things that they suggested it could be, but not sleep apnea. And it only really came to me whenever he had a mild cold. Like I have a mild cold now, but if he had a mild cold, and still to this day, it will cause him so many problems. Like his adenoids, we think are enlarged, as well as visibly his tonsils, but we didn't get to see that until he was just approaching 2 years old, because to get a child to open their mouth and let you look in their throat, it doesn't happen. So when he had a mild cold, his nose would be blocked instantly, couldn't breathe out of his nose, had to use his mouth to breathe. His tonsils are enlarged, he's not able to breathe. Like his oxygen levels are like visibly like going down because he's like gasping for air. So because this happens so frequently, because they get sick so much when they're so little, we were always out of hours. So out of hours is a hospital near us, and it's a major hospital, but we would always be out of hours in the children's ward, and it's somewhere that you don't have to have an accident or an emergency, although low oxygen levels is an emergency, but would be there regularly. And we had inhalers given to us, all things like that, which really weren't the right thing to do, but we thought, okay, he's asthmatic, and we, really struggled to get him to take it, but he was taking it. But there was this one time where I went to the doctors for something. He wasn't right, he had a temperature, I think he had a tummy bug, and she did the standard checks, and she was like, his oxygen levels are very low, we need to take him to the hospital via an ambulance. And I wasn't with him at the time, I was working. The doctor's surgery's down the road. My husband rang me, I ran up, and we went to the hospital together via the ambulance. And he was kept in, and they said like his oxygen levels are low, but they didn't specifically think it's because his tonsils are so large he can't breathe, and he has a mild cold. So that kind of triggered something. I was like, I didn't know his oxygen levels were low. And I felt a bit panicked, like how, like they were saying, if this happens again, bring him in. Like, how are you supposed to know? Because that's just his day-to-day life. But yeah, when we started hearing that he was like a little bit raspy or a little bit struggling for breath, we would take him to this hospital. It's a half an hour drive. A lot of the times it would be quiet, which would be really great. And one time I said to the doctor, I think he's got obstructive sleep apnea. His sleep is incredibly poor. His symptoms are he wakes up when he's like sleeping, deep sleep. He wakes up, he jolts, he cries, he goes back to sleep eventually. Sometimes he would need us to go back to sleep. Or to be honest, 90% of the time he'd need us, because it would be scary, I imagine. And there was this long list of symptoms, and he was like, I'm an ear, nose and throat doctor. I agree with you. We're going to get you in for an appointment, and we'll take it from there. And at this point, I was very happy because I hear in the UK especially, lots of people go into the GP with this problem, like I did, and them saying it's behavioural, just not referring to ear, nose and throat. And the ear, nose and throat waiting list is a long, long, long wait. So at this point, I've been told that we have a referral, and if it gets worse, to ring up and see if they can speed us up. I think it was a couple of days later that night, he was awake every 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes every 10 minutes. Like, he would wake up all the time and he would not sleep, and he was just so upset about it, and just crying out and just so irritated. So I rang the paediatrics department. I basically rang the whole hospital because I wasn't sure where his referral went to. And when I rang and I got through, someone kindly looked at my notes and she said, your referral's been logged, but it's not been sent through, so you would never have got an appointment. Which at that point I was like, I'm so glad I rang. But I rang, and as I was advised, I chased, and they listened to the situation, and they were like, yeah, we're going to get him seen ASAP. So we got to see a consultant who was actually a private consultant that just works for the NHS when he needs to. And he is a plastic surgeon, so he does plastic surgery for nose reconstruction and stuff. So I get that he knows the adenoids and, ear, nose and throat. But I just didn't feel like he was right. He wasn't a kiddie surgeon. And we walked in the room, we sat down, and he was like, this child does not have sleep apnea. If he had sleep apnea, he wouldn't be able to keep himself awake. and he'd be falling asleep in front of me. And I have done plenty research, and I was like, that's not true. It even says on the NHS website, if a younger child has sleep apnea, their behavioural issues are hyperactivity, because they're overtired, they're just hyper, they're just like busy. Like, you would never look at my son and say he was tired. He could be absolutely exhausted and he would not show it, he wouldn't display it, I would know, but he would just be, he's a busy boy. He'd be busy, he'd be playing, he'd be dancing, running around, just being normal. Like, he would just be perceived as normal. So when he said this, I got my back up, because I was like, that's not true. Like, this is just going to waste my time. At this point, I was really, really worried, because his oxygen levels were like mid 80s, and I could see that as we had bought something for us to have at home, so we could monitor it and, you know, get into the hospital. And it was like really fluctuating, and it really wasn't a healthy level. And I was like, I want action for him. And he was like, we'll do a sleep study. Hopefully it will be an at-home sleep study, but he can't be operated on until he's 3, because he's so young. And I was just like, this is another thing I've never seen on the NHS website or spoken to anyone about before. So I was just like, okay. So I just let his comments go, because I thought I might see someone else, or I will ask to see someone else. We had a sleep study. I rang to follow that up, having been told if you didn't ring before, you wouldn't have had an appointment, because your referral wasn't actually like sent through. The lady said, he's so young, he was 2, he's so young, we want to see him like sooner rather than later. Plus, sleep studies across the country are getting dropped. I don't know what they're replacing them with. I think they're just dispersing them and doing less. But basically, it was her last week working. No one was replacing her. So she really quickened the process for us. We had an at-home sleep study. It was an okay night. It was a good night for us. So his oxygen levels weren't dipping like crazy. I was awake and watching them for about an hour, maybe more. And in the night, I was waking just because you can see on the screen what the oxygen levels are like and the heart rate. But obviously it goes into the computer data. So if you're sleeping, you don't know that, and the results are with the doctors. So yeah, she told us we could do it for 2 nights as well. So we did it for 2 nights. We dropped it off again. I was then told the doctor believes your son has glue ear, which is basically like a build-up of the inner ear, which can be a result of enlarged adenoids. But he said that he believes he's got glue ear. He wants him to have a hearing test. That wait was a little while. It was about, and I rang up to follow that up, and I got a cancellation. So that was about a month. And we went in. He failed all his hearing tests, like all of them. He was doing so well, and he was like really passing them when she was encouraging him. When she stopped playing with him, like it's games that you have to do, he didn't have the confidence to like pick out where the bunny was and like basically follow the games on his own. And she was like, I think that he'll need grommets. And I'm like, I know my kid, like I just don't feel like that's needed. And I spoke to his nursery, and they were like, no, Magnus does not have glue ear. Because it's like when they don't hear you, they don't listen, like they're partially deaf. And I'm like, he's not. I've got no concern about his hearing. So that was a bit of a disappointment to hear that he needed that surgery, but it wasn't officially told to us just yet. And I think at this point then we had the referral back to say, please come and speak to a new doctor about the results of the glue ear hearing test, also the sleep study test. And I said at that point, please may I have the sleep study results. So I was looking at them and I was like, there's nothing, because there's brackets, there's nothing that warrants him having severe obstructive sleep apnea. His oxygen levels didn't drop for that long and didn't drop to that low. But with sleep apnea in children, mild, moderate and severe are all treated the same from what I'm told, because the results of having blocked airways and restricted oxygen are damaging, no matter how bad your sleep apnea is. So when I could see that his results were okay, more mild, like mild, moderate, I was like, that's it, he's not going to get the surgery. I had rang around private hospitals. They were like, no, he's got to be 3. We don't have the insurance for it. That was their reasoning. And I think this is where that private doctor got his information from. But I was like, I just have to, this is it. Like, I know they're going to bring me to the end of the road now. And I'm really upset because it really can give you heart problems in the future. It can cause behavioural problems. It can lead to ADHD. It can, the brain development is a lot slower. Like, it can be really damaging. So when we went in to see this doctor, I was ready to put up a fight and be like, you say it's mild, because that was a good night, believe me. He is awake all the time, every 10 to 15 minutes if he's like a little bit sick, which he's a little bit sick all the time. But he did some tests on him. He looked at his hearing test results and he was like, and he did visual tests as well. And he was like, I don't think he's got glue. I think he's got an inner ear build-up of liquid because he's got enlarged adenoids. And I was like, we're on the same page here. He looked at his throat. He was like, his tonsil, especially the right-hand side one, was massive, but not inflamed. No potential infection, nothing like that. Big, but not red and inflamed. And he was like, yeah, he would really benefit with having surgery, having his tonsils removed and his adenoids removed if necessary whilst we're doing it. And I was just so relieved. And I think from starting my journey in February to getting that diagnosis was February, I think it was 2.5, 3 months. It wasn't long because I was following up, I was ringing up. And especially after the nights where he got no sleep. And yeah, I was right. It's not behavioural because my son wants to sleep. I just feel really, really, really happy. So we're now on the waiting list for surgery between the end of summer, early autumn. I'm not even thinking about it in terms of what it's going to look like. I've done my research. I'm part of a few Facebook forums where it's support groups for parents with children with sleep apnea. I understand what the surgery element looks like. I know obviously the ins and outs, but I'm trying not to personally put myself in that situation just yet because I'm going to be a nervous wreck. They obviously have to go under general anaesthetic. And yeah, I'm not looking forward to that at all. I couldn't imagine anything worse, but it's funnily enough, ironically, the thing I want him to have, because I don't want him to have any health issues, in the near future, in the future when he's an adult. So it's definitely the right decision. And he'll get much better sleep for it. I have spoken to an enormous amount of people about how the removal of the tonsils and adenoids have affected their child's sleep, and instantly people have had results instantly, and I'm very, very hopeful for it. So I'm really looking forward to when he has peace at night and he's able to sleep and he's able to breathe comfortably. So I really hope that little update is helpful, like I say. But my biggest tip is to phone and just make sure your referral has been processed, ask to be put on the cancellation list, just show that you're keen and ready to work with the doctors at the NHS. obviously don't want to be badgering them, but they all appreciated a follow-up. And honestly, no one, I asked, like, at first I was like more determined and like, I'm gonna get him an appointment, so I was just like ruthless. And then when I was in the process of it, I was like, do you mind if I call and just to follow up? And they were always like, absolutely, here's our number, you know, saved me like ringing around all of the hospital. But yeah, it is okay. It's absolutely fine. It's not the end of the world if you can get help as well. If you can't, if you're really struggling, and I know so many people that go to their GP and they're just cut off, they're like, no, no, no. And the case would have been the same for us if I didn't have the need to take him to the hospital. Like, he had to go to the hospital because he wasn't breathing. Like, he was put on oxygen. Like, that's not normal. Like, so he was put on oxygen. And I happened to speak to someone who was an ear, nose and throat doctor. And I have suggested to a few people that have come to me ever since knowing about my son, and they've got children with suspected sleep apnea. They've gone to out of hours too, and they've raised it at that point, and then their referral has been directly from the hospital. So hopefully that really helps. I really, really hope it does, because it can be really stressful and you've got to be easy on yourself as well. But yeah.